Hey everyone, Tactics here with another War Within a Tank preview, where this time we're going to be covering Vengeance Demon Hunters, kind of looking at what's going on with the spec in War Within and the two new hero talent trees you have to play around with and how they impact you. I've already got similar videos out for Guardian, Protection Warriors, and Protection Paladins with Blood Decay and Brew coming out over the next few days, so make sure you are subscribed and go check those out. Otherwise, let's talk changes from Dragonflight, where there isn't a ton, but we did see that nerf hammer drop this recent week with the removal of double utility sigils. Again, I've talked about this a bunch in many other videos. I'm sure it's going to make some players unhappy, but this is 100% something that had to happen and was pretty expected, if you ask me, as bringing all tanks up to the level of utility that double sigil VDH had just wasn't feasible or healthy for the game. Also, something very important to note here, even with the removal of double sigils here, on utility sigils anyways, Vengeance Demon Hunters still have the most AoE stops out of any tank, so maybe that helps to put things a little bit more in perspective for you. There was a compensation buff to it here to make it a little bit better, where it still is giving you that second charge of Sigil of Flame, and now it also reduces the CDR of Sigil of Flame by 5 seconds, which helps a bit with the uptime, especially in this first patch of an expansion where you're going to be losing a lot of uptime on the spell because of the loss of the tier set that you're currently using, as well as the reduction in haste values that you have. This does also potentially open up this choice node a bit more in Mythic Plus. Maybe there's a lot of situations now where you're going to be taking the Down in Flames double fiery brand over illuminated sigils in keys. Always nice to have an interesting choice here. Potentially you could do some compensation buffs to a few areas around the tree just to make this a little bit easier to swallow. And maybe they don't need to do all of these. Maybe just one or two of these would be good, just depending on how the spec actually feels during Mythic Plus testing this week. First, maybe I would consider adding Sigil of Spite to this, and that, for those that don't know, they've renamed Elysian Decree to more fit the Demon Hunter theme. It's now Sigil of Spite, so I don't think having two of the offensive sigils was problematic. I don't think it would be bad to have Sigil of Spite also gain an additional charge from this. Second, you could revert some of the Season 4 nerfs that Vengeance got, namely Cycle of Binding. I don't think it would be super problematic with the reduced number of sigils that you have to push this back up to 3 seconds. That would also help a bit with Sigil of Flame uptime. Finally, Sigil of Silence, of course, received a couple different nerfs, and I think the one you could peel back on is the cooldown nerf on it. Potentially you could drop that back down to a minute maybe. You would definitely want to leave the duration nerf on it, I think, just because that's probably too much, but I don't think it would be too bad. I think it would be pretty fair if this was moved back down to a minute. Again, you don't need to do all three of those buffs, but I think, you know, one or two of those would definitely feel a lot nicer. Just my thoughts there. Outside of that, there was a general adjustment to AoE CCs that are longer in duration, so Sigil of Misery does kind of fit that bill, and basically it would just had its baseline duration nerfed from 20 seconds down to 15. This is still fine to use as a stop. Obviously, you're still probably going to be able to do some Shadow Meld skips with it. It was mostly addressing, I believe, permanently CCing certain mobs on dungeon boss fights as an example, and like I said, this wasn't specifically targeted at Demon Hunters. A lot of other things got hit as well, including things like Druid, Mass Entangle, and a few other things. So mostly trying to stop you mass CCing groups of things and just ignoring them. Outside of that, talent tree remains exactly the same, which is kind of expected because Demon Hunters did receive that rework in patch 10.2, which is quite recent. So now let's move on to the tier set, which does help out a little bit here. So to start, basically the two-piece, you get some extra Soul Cleave damage, and Soul Cleave also has a 35% chance to shatter a lesser fragment from a targeted hits. Like I mentioned, your soul generation is way down because your haste is down because you've lost your tier set, and so this does do at least a little bit to help, especially in, you know, those raid situations where you're pressing Soul Cleave a lot. You're not pressing Spirit Bomb rather. The 4-piece here, consuming a soul fragment increases damage and healing of your next Fel Dev by 2%, up to 15 stacks for a 30% damage increase. Something you're probably going to think about too much. Maybe you might do a little bit of timing and maxing when in Fel Scarred. When we get to that, I'll talk about, but basically there's resets in Fel Dev in that talent tree. But generally, this is just kind of a passive damage increase to your Fel Dev and to your Soul Cleave with a little bit of extra fragment regeneration. It's definitely not the worst tank tier set. I don't think it's the best either. It's just kind of decent, I would say. There's not a ton to talk about on the tier front because they are so simple, because they want you to focus on the hero talents. So let's do that, and let's focus on the hero talents here. And we're going to start with Aldrachi Reaver. I believe that is how you pronounce it. If it's wrong, that is too bad, because I'm going to pronounce it that way the entire video. To start, this one is basically around giving you a bigger burst window, and it does appear that this is more raid focused, whereas the other Fel Scarred is going to be more Mythic Plus focused. So basically, you are consuming souls, and every 40 souls you consume, it empowers your Throw Glaive to, do buff on your Fracture and your Soul Cleave. Your next single Fracture and your next single Soul Cleave, both of them will be buffed, and you basically get a different series of events that happen depending on which one you cast first and which one you cast second. So it is kind of a combo here. If you cast your Soul Cleave, that's going to do slashes on the enemy, and if you cast it second, it does more slashes. And then if you cast your Fracture, it applies a debuff to the mob, a single target debuff, a 15% increased damage taken, which if it's second, is a 30% increase damage taken for 20 seconds. So as you can imagine, a lot of times you're trying to kind of combine your damage amps together. You have a lot of synergy here if you're doing Reaver's Mark, so your Fracture second in the combo after casting your Empowered Throw Glaive. So you go Throw Glaive into Soul Cleave into Fracture to give yourself that 30% damage amp for 15 seconds, which you can then also stack up with your Fiery Brand here. That's also a 40% additional fire damage thing. And it also synergizes with the capstone here, which is when you've done your combo, so you've done both empowered abilities, you then gain a buff, which is attack speed by 15% for 20 seconds, and then also your damage and healings increased by 30% for 10 seconds. So it's basically a wombo combo of all these various damage amps and damage taken increases that you put out here that can give for some pretty powerful damage windows for this hero spec, which is kind of cool. Then, of course, you can further increase that kind of damage amp stuff with your hunt stuff, and then also, of course, I believe the hunt also gives you a free cast of Reaver's Glaive as well, so you can kind of do a couple of those throughout the thing, kind of lining up with your Firebrand. So again, very big on the burst CDs here. Also, Wounded Quarry does another bit to actually help you with your soul generation. So while you actually have this Reaver's Mark damage amp on the target, your attacks have a chance to do additional damage, which isn't a ton of damage, but bigger, you kind of just spew out souls during your Reaver's Mark window. So I can go kind of hit a dummy for you, just kind of show you what it's like. So basically, boom, I'm gonna throw that out, Fellblade in, pop that, whatever. We're gonna hunt just to proc it. So you can see my Reaver's Glaive is lit up. I can throw my thing out, I can Soul Cleave first, and I can Fracture. See this debuff on the target, 30%. And then you can see buffs on me, 10%, and that's my attack speed increase. And you can see kind of as I'm hitting targets, you're going to, you get a lot more of these actual fragments now when this is up. You see just kind of going up pretty solidly. Also combining with the tier set here, usually you're going to be gated, at least in your Reaver's Mark windows, it seems, by your Fury and not your soul fragments and stuff like that. You're going to have quite a bit of soul fragments to actually spend there during your Reaver's Mark window, which again, because it's kind of a combination of from when you get the hunt and also from when you build 40 fragments, you can, this spreads out a little bit, which is kind of nice. So you can kind of extend these windows and have a larger uptime on that Reaver's Mark to give you the more soul generation, as well as just, the attack speed increase, as well, and these kind of damage increases, which you're probably, again, going to want to line up, at least, with like a Fiery Brand window, that kind of thing. The other thing, too, there's some interesting synergy here with like Fellblade giving you a small DR. This isn't enough to be something on its own, but it's just something nice you can kind of layer in there, and you can get pretty decent uptime, right? Because you can go in, you can Fellblade, and then, you see the short DR here. It's running out. You can Vengeful insta Fellblade back in, and that gives you more because now Vengeful is resetting Fellblade and Fellblade's giving that DR. So that's a cool little synergy there that you can use, which is kind of nice. One thing to be aware of here when it comes to the Reaver's Glaive cast, because you can kind of do them back to back with the hunt and getting enough actual soul fragments to use, is that these buff durations don't fully stack. So for example here, your Reaver's Mark, it's not going to be like a 40-second or like a 35-second duration Reaver's Mark thing. It caps at the 20-second duration. And the other thing specifically about Reaver's Mark, if you're doing things back to back, if you do the empowered Reaver's Mark first and then you do like the hunt, and then you do it again, and then you do the unempowered Reaver's Mark second, that 15% damage taken increase overwrites the 30% damage taken increase. So be careful if you are doing back-to-back Reaver's Glaives from building souls into hunting, for example. Similar thing as well for Thrill of the Fight, where you are not going to actually get a double or a duration increase on the either buff, the 20-second attack speed or the 10-second damage and healing increase. It just puts it back to the max duration. So definitely incentivizing you again to spread out your Reaver's Glaives a little bit here, which again is probably something that's going to happen anyways, with Hunt being on a 1.5-minute cooldown, and at least in single target, where I think you're going to be using this for the most part. Reaver's Glaive takes about a minute to actually build up. Obviously it's going to be a little faster if you're doing a previous Reaver's Glaive beforehand, but on its own, if you're just going from nothing to a Reaver's Glaive, takes about a minute. So that's Aldrachi Reaver. Like I said, this is probably going to be your go-to in raid. You're going to be synergizing these damage amps together to get some big burst. A little bit harder to do that in Mythic Plus, and that's where our next hero talent tree, Fel Scarred, comes into play. And this one is really, really cool. So it's kind of centered around, your abilities kind of get empowered as you go into meta. And if you press those empowered abilities, they do a big uncapped AoE explosion. It is helped out a little bit with one of these points where it does more damage if it only hits a single target. But basically, you kind of want to go through and hit all your empowered abilities whenever you go into meta, just to actually get use out of that empowerment. So for example, when you Fel Dev, it'll only ever empower your Soul Cleave and your Spirit Bomb. And then when you actually hit meta, it empowers those two things, but it also down here empowers Fel Dev itself, Immolation Aura, and Sigil of Flame. So you have 5 empowered abilities in your meta and 2 empowered abilities that you want to press during your Fel Dev. Outside of that, there is some resets, like I mentioned here. When you actually go into meta itself, this does actually end up resetting the cooldown of both Sigil of Flame and Fel Dev, which really, really helps your uptime. Again, you're going into a new patch. You're losing your tier. You have less haste. This hero talent tree alone in Mythic Plus really, really helps make the spec feel so much better, because you're getting more meta uptime and you're getting more Sigil of Flame uptime, which is particularly good again when combined with the Illuminated Sigils, because that's even more CDR on Sigil of Flame and the additional charge, and that really helps you get that parry uptime, which is, it really, really does feel pretty solid despite losing so much moving from Dragonflight to War Within. On top of that, this tree actually provides a ton of passive defensive benefits to Demon Hunter on this right side here. So one, you get a little bit of stagger. 5% of your damage is staggered as fire damage, and then that's further reduced by 10%. Nice. It's little. It's not going to be super impactful, but you combine this again, you're now getting 5% max health and 20% armor outside of meta. So not only do you have more meta uptime, but you're also stronger outside of your meta. And on top of that, again, 5% agility outside of meta. So you're getting a lot of passive defensive benefits, which just generally kind of make the spec feel a lot better. And then on the left side here, there's a fury increase, which is kind of nice in AoE. This one is kind of okay. It's your stun is now also a slow and a cast speed reduction for a short amount of time, or some move speed based on fury, and then just some passive fire damage on your Soul Cleave, auto attacks, and throw glaive. You also have this one here, Sigil of Flame. I assume you're probably going to take this one for the most part, even though you're not a big fan of Mastery as Vengeance. This is a decent chunk of Mastery and Fury casting Sigil of Flame is going to be giving you, versus a little bit of increase and crit damage on Immo Aura. Obviously, this one is probably going to be more damage, but I think generally you're probably going to be fine taking the Mastery and the Fury generation. So just to show you how this works a bit, basically, there's a couple things. One, obviously, you get the resets, which I'll show you. And actually, wait, let me actually go into a build where I have here. Oh, the other thing too, with Cheat Death, it actually counts as a full meta usage. So if you ever do proc your last resort Cheat Death, it actually will also count as triggering demonic intensity. So you get 5 empowered abilities you can press, and you get your resets on Fel Dev and Sigil of Flame. Let's do the dummy here and kind of show you. So right, you saw your Sigil of Flame out, you're going in, boom, you're building up maybe your soul stacks, whatever, in a pack, and then you're going Fel Dev, boom, you can see my empowered soul or Spirit Bomb, my empowered Soul Cleave there, get those off. And then now if I go, I can pop my Sigil of Flame to see that I have 0 Sigil of Flames right now, pop my meta, I get my Sigil of Flames. Obviously all my empowered buttons change around here. I also have my Fel Dev again, which is reset here, and so I can spend all that stuff, boom. I can spend my Fel Dev here to extend my meta a little bit. you know, can continuously whatever press. Make sure you press all 5 of your empowered buttons during your meta window, right? You want to make sure to get each of those bursts. Then you see I come back. Feldev is up again, and notice the Sigil of Flames obviously don't continue to CDR while you're in meta because they just get reset. But your regular Feldev does seem to just continue to CDR when you're in meta because only your empowered Feldev is available. So if you press Feldev just before going into meta, then you meta. By the time your meta is done, and again, you can press the Feldev during meta again, your regular Feldev will be back again. So this is a pretty long chain of meta you can do, which is kind of nice. And obviously, again, you're going to be throwing in your other defensives in there. I didn't press anything else, but basically that's kind of how it works. Really, really nice to shore up the defensive kind of gaps with Demon Hunter at the start of an expansion because of the additional meta uptime, because of the additional Sigil of Flame uptime if you're going to be running Illuminated Sigils, as well as just giving you kind of that passive durability. Playing this in Mythic Plus has actually felt pretty decent. I think it's probably the most kind of impactful hero talent tree of the 4 tanks I've done videos on so far. So that is actually really, really cool to see. I think a lot of people are going to be enjoying Fel Scarred in Mythic Plus. So overall, the 2 hero trees for Vengeance do seem to have very distinct roles, right? With Aldrachi Reaver being more targeted towards a raid player and lower target counts and that burst damage kind of timing everything together, whereas Fel Scarred appears to be more catered towards Mythic Plus, obviously meta oriented, and a little bit of Sigil of Flame thrown in there as well. I am curious to know what you guys think about hero trees with such distinct roles. Do you think this kind of makes you feel forced into playing one in certain content, or do you like that you have the different kind of choices and flexibility of, hey, this one's really good in Mythic Plus, cool, this one's really good in Raid, cool? Let me know down in the comments below. Of course, I need to shout out all of my amazing Patreons for their support and helping me to continue to create all of this content, so thank you, and I'll see everyone in the next video.